Welcome to week 8 of our ABC Speaker Series. Today, speaker number 69, and we're happy to say that. And my name is Paul Anthony, sometimes Paul Agony, but that's another story. And we welcome you here. And we're very happy to welcome Stephen Moore a little bit later on, too. As most of you know, we are in the midst of a $25,000 matching grant challenge, which expires on September 1, 2025. We are matching only those funds which were donated after the 17th of July. To date, we have raised $46,000. And that is not including the original match, which is astounding. And in the last week, we've had several major people step up that we were unaware of and made up that difference, which is just astounding. Now, we have a little more than 3 weeks to go, and I know some of you who have intended to give some revenue to us for this reason, and now you see that we're way over the top, maybe saying to yourselves, well, you know, maybe I don't have to do anything about it. So we are shooting to make it really significant, to go to 50,000. So right now we're like 4,000 away. So if any of you were intending to give, but now after you hear that number, which I was reluctant to mention, but it's in the interest of transparency, I encourage you to step up and let's make that at least 50,000, which for us, after 7 years, will be unprecedented. Yeah, so we're very happy about that. Thank you. Since last week, we have filled out some of the weeks in the 2026 schedule, as you can see here. And this one, you know about already. Okay? July 12th. Then we have signed in the last week Robert Woodson. He'll be on August 3rd. He's, as you can read, founder and president of the Woodson Center, etc. And so far, and last but not least today, we have Josh Krashauer, who will be with us on August 10th. So we're filling out the schedule. We have 3 major people here who can address various issues. And keep in mind that next year will be an election year, and they'll be appearing literally 2 or 3 months before the actual election. So there'll be a lot to talk about as to polling and trends and all that stuff. So we thank them very much, and we can't wait to see them. Now, this is some visuals that Stephen is going to use a little bit later on. Next week, our speaker for the 2025 season, the last one, will be the Marquis de Lafayette. And as most of you know, the last week for the last 4 years, we featured some historical figure, not hysterical figure, historical figure, who comes in native garb and talks about the days of, you know, what it was like in those days. Mark Schneider plays Marquis de Lafayette. He will retrace the Marquis's 24-state tour of America, 1824-1825. From July 24 to September 25, the last surviving major general of the American Revolutionary War made a tour of the 24 United States. He was received by the populace with a hero's welcome at many stops, and many honors and monuments were presented to commemorate and memorialize his accomplishments during the war. Lafayette led troops under the command of George Washington nearly 50 years earlier than that, and he fought in several crucial battles, including the Battle of Brandywine in Pennsylvania and the Siege of Yorktown. At this time, I would like to recognize your hardworking ABC board. Just stand or raise your hand, those of you who are in the vestibule, come on out here. when your name is called, and please hold your applause until the end. Our Vice President, Don Bogus. No applause, please. No, see, there you go. Don't touch the microphone, okay? Our Treasurer, Susan O'Connor-Bear. Okay. Secretary Anita Price, who I think is not here today. Maybe she is. But she no. Okay. Connie Winters. These are our directors, Ruth Ann San Marco, Debbie Rick, and Lynn Silver. Howie Aiken, and John Abbott, who's the youngest of our group, and of course he's still a working stiff. And he's flying right now to Bangalore or someplace, I don't know where. Obviously he can't be here at this time. As usual, we have our Q&A after Mr. Moore's presentation. Please silence your cell phones. Even if you think it's off, check it out. And let me make one other thing. At 4:15, Mr. Moore has to do a cut-in on television, okay? So we're going to let him go at 4. He has to go into his subterranean cave where he will shoot for the 4:15 thing, and then he has to leave immediately after that to get to the airport for a 7 o'clock flight tonight. So I know everybody wants to talk to him after he leaves, but he's really pressed for time in this particular case. Today's speaker, Stephen Moore, has served as a senior economic advisor to President Donald Trump, where he focused on tax reform, regulatory reform, and energy policy. In addition to this role, Moore is a Heritage Visiting Senior Fellow and Senior Economic Analyst at CNN. With more than 30 years of experience as an economist, we hire those people to be digging the ice when you're doing this, you know. Moore is positioned to provide a deep understanding of the shifts in our global economy. Moore previously wrote on the economy and public policy for the Wall Street Journal and was a member of its editorial board. During his career, Moore has served as a senior economist at Congressional Joint Economic Committee and as a senior economics fellow at the Cato Institute as well, where he published dozens of studies on federal and state fiscal policy. He advised the National Economic Commission in 1987 and served as a research director for President Reagan's Commission on Privatization. He was a mere child when he worked for Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome economist Stephen Moore.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a great couple of days here. It is absolutely gorgeous here, and what a wonderful place this is. So what a wonderful opportunity this is for me to talk to you a little bit about what's going on. By the way, last night I had dinner just in the little village down the street, and just walking along. It was just such a nice night last night, and this lady walked up to me, and she looks right up to me. She's staring at me. She said, "I know you, don't I?" I said, "I don't know, ma'am." I said, and she was very cute. She said, "I'm sure I've seen you on TV." And so I thought I'd, play along with a little bit with her. So I said, "Well, I don't know, ma'am." I said, what do you watch?" And it was so adorable because she just had a big smile and she goes, finally the light bulb went on. She said, "Oh, didn't I see you on Wheel of Fortune last week?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." That was me. So I want to have some fun with you. I want to talk. You must be so excited about getting to listen to an economist. We're just as fun as a barrel of monkeys, right? But I want to make this kind of fun, enjoyable. And by the way, let me kind of take the temperature of the room. And honest to God, I want your true answer. I don't care one way or the other. So if I give you 3 choices, you love Trump, you haven't decided about Trump, or you hate Trump. How many of you love Trump? Wow. How many of you hate Trump? A few of you. How many of you haven't made up your mind? Yeah, after all this time, you still haven't made up your mind. So anyway, I met Donald Trump exactly 9 years ago with my good friend Larry Kudlow, and we went to go see Trump is when he first started running for re-election, and it was early 2016 when there were about 8 Republicans in the field, a huge field of candidates, Jeb Bush and Scott Walker, and all these amazing candidates. But Trump was making some noise, and I had never met Donald. How many of you have met Donald Trump personally? A number of you have. I'd never met him. I didn't really like his persona that much on TV. I thought he was kind of a blowhard. Don't tell him I said that, please. But, But, I was just curious about him. So Larry and I said, okay, let's go meet with Donald Trump. We went to Trump Tower up there on Fifth Avenue, went up to the 62nd floor, and we went into the room, and it was just Donald Trump, Larry Kudlow, and I. And we sat there and talked for about an hour and a half. In fact, some of the charts I'm going to show you are some of the charts we showed Trump at that very first meeting. And it was just an amazing meeting. I mean, I was just amazed by the man. He was incredibly charming, incredibly knowledgeable, could not have been nicer, and really had a vision for America. And I'll never forget, Larry and I walked out of that room, and we both looked at each other with our jobs open like, he's the one. There was just something about him. He had he had his game face on, and we realized he's going to win this thing. And so we got involved with him, and it was a hell of a race in 2016, and then of course in 2024. But I've gotten to know Trump pretty well. He's always been very good to me personally. Some of you, how many of you saw what happened in the Oval Office with me last week? Did any of you see it? I was, I had a meeting with Trump that I got a call from Susie Wiles, can you come over and meet with the president? I hadn't met with the president in a few months. And I went over there and I walked in the Oval Office and there was nobody there except Donald Trump, President Trump, and his handler. And we had a long conversation. I brought these big cardboard graphs, because I've known Trump for a long time. He doesn't like to read, but he loves to look at pictures. Right? So I thought I want to show him these pictures. And so I showed him about 5 of these charts about how much better and I'll show you these in a few minutes, but they all showed how well the economy had done in his first term versus Biden. It was up like this and down like that under Biden, et cetera, et cetera. And there were about 4 or 5 of this, and he got very excited about it. And so he said, hey, Nicole, why don't we have an impromptu press conference? I'm like, huh? And he says, why don't we invite all the media in? Because, the cameras and all those people, they're all waiting outside the Oval Office anytime Trump has an announcement. So they open the door, and these 40 of these reporters come in, 10 cameras. They're staring right at my face. I stand there so he put a little easel up, and we had the 5 charts, okay? And so he says, Steve, I'll stand over here, and you stand over there, and then we'll start this press conference. I'm like practically wetting my pants. I'm so nervous, And so he says, okay, so I went to this press conference because Steve Moore has something to tell you. Steve, take it away. I'm like, oh. And so, I went on. The funny thing about it was, I got my composure back. I said, this chart shows this. And he goes, I love this chart. And so what was happening is after each chart, he would take it off the easel and he'd carry it over to the Oval Office desk and put it on that, and he was like Vanna White, and so it was a really fun experience. And so now I can die a happy man because that was my 2 minutes of glory. But this is a president who knows what he wants to do. I'm not going to bury the lead here. I'm super bullish on this president. I think I don't always agree with Trump, and I'm very glad that when we get to the Q&A, I really want to hear your honest opinion on things. There's some things I strongly agree with Trump on, and some things I strongly disagree with him on. When I walked into the room on Thursday, I walked in, and President Trump said, there's Steve Moore. He's a great economist, but he doesn't like my tariffs. And I said, no, Mr. President, I'm not a big fan of your tariffs. But that's one thing I respect, by the way, about Donald Trump, is you can disagree with him, and you can still, be in his orbit. And he knows I don't always like his tariffs, but we can talk a little bit about that. And, when I say my prayers at night, I just say, thank God that Kamala Harris is not president today, because I think we'd be in a lot worse shape. And, when I think about that, it's the old, that old story about the Jewish woman who, the Jewish gentleman, Harold, and he calls up his rabbi, and he says, Rabbi, you got to do something. My wife, she's nag all the time, and blah, blah, blah. And she's just become a tyrant. And now, Rabbi, she's trying to poison me. She's trying to poison me. So the rabbi says, oh, come on, Harold, I've known you guys for 30 years. Your wife is not trying to poison you. And he said, well, look, please, Rabbi, would you just do me a favor? Would you just go over and see my wife and sit down with her, and then I'd like your advice about what I should do. So, sure enough, 2 weeks later, he calls up the rabbi. Rabbi, it's Harold. Did you happen to get a chance to go see my wife? He said, yes, Harold, I spent about an hour with your wife. And he said, well, okay, Harold. Rabbi, what is your advice? He said, well, take the poison. Now, how many, by the way, how many of you in this room have been married for more than 25 years? Wow. How many over 30 years? Anybody over 40 years? 40? Nobody's been married over 50 years. Really? Well, congratulations. That's fantastic. I love marriage. It's a great institution. Okay, so let's talk economics. Let's get right into it. I'm going to show you a series of charts and trying to go through this kind of quickly. There will be an exam at the end of this, so pay close attention. But let's start with this. This is one of the most important charts here. This is the, you're all kind of familiar with this chart. It is the stock market, the United States stock market over the last 60 years. And what's interesting about this chart, you're probably all familiar with the blue, that blue line. That's the S&P 500. By the way, this is on a logarithmic scale, so it shows the the percentage point increases in the valuations. And the green line is kind of an interesting one because the green line shows you what happened with the stock market after adjusting for inflation. After adjusting for inflation, because how many of you in this room were in the financial markets and know a lot about it? Well, when you make an investment, you're all investors. Hopefully you know that when you make your investment, you're interested in your after inflation, not your before inflation rate of return. And what's interesting about this chart is, well, first of all, look at the blue line. I mean, that is what I call the greatest story never told. We all, as Americans, have been privileged to live under the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of civilization. No country has ever lived through anything like what's happened in the United States over the last 40 years. Let me give you an example. Anybody in this room, can you tell me what the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit its low point at in 1982? Anybody want to take a guess? What? I heard, did somebody say 1,000? Okay, if you said 1,000, what's that? You are exactly right. The low point in summer of 1982 was right at about 800. Now think about that. In 1982, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is at 800. Today, the Dow Jones is at 45,000. So if the next 40 years is as good as the last 40 years, the Dow Jones in 40 years will be 1.5 million. So this has been incredible. Now look, if you look at the green line, that's an important one because it takes into account inflation. And what's interesting is, if you look at the 1970s, that was a horrible period. In fact, the Dow Jones actually hit 1,000 in 1966. I don't know if you were aware of that. And then 15 years later, it's at 800. So that's a pretty bear market, right? When you have a 15-year period where the Dow loses 15% of its value, adjusted for inflation, the Dow lost over half its value. And then you can see, the way that I like to put it is, the clouds dispersed, the sun came out, and God gave America Ronald Reagan. And you have this, look at that, just upward trajectory through the 80s and 90s, and then we had the correction in 2008, but it's right back up on its merry way. So my point is, there's nowhere better to invest than the US of A. There just isn't. Now, they might pick one country or another that's going to have a spurt of growth, but I believe the United States will remain the alpha male dominant country in the world for the next 50 years. We're set up to do that because we do believe in freedom and free enterprise. And we have great people and smart people and innovators. And no other country can compete with us on that capacity. So I love that picture because it just gives you a sense of the potential that can happen in the United States if we stay on this free market course. So this just shows you what happened under Trump in his first term. Because people ask me, should I be bullish or bearish? Well, I can't tell you what's going to happen over the next 3.5 years. Nobody knows for sure. But I can tell you this, the stock market did pretty darn well in Trump's first term. And this, by the way, takes account the COVID, in 2024, which was a killer. By the way, can we all agree in this room that we will never, 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 never again allow our government to shut down our businesses, and never allow our government to shut down our schools, and never allow our government to shut down our parks. And it was the most outrageous abuse of power ever. By the way, we have very strong evidence that lockdowns killed about 3 times more people than they saved. Lockdowns were a killer, and Anthony Fauci belongs in jail. But in any case, you can look at these charts and you can see that it was a very, very strong market, and that's a pretty good indicator of maybe where we're headed over the years to come. So the big issue, people ask me, why did Trump win this election? Why is it? I met with Trump 2 years ago at his compost out there in New Jersey, almost exactly 2 years ago. And I remember meeting with him and I'm thinking, he was so down and out. Remember, there were 5 indictments against him. He was way behind in the polls. It just looked like it was impossible that he could. Really, when you think about it, he really is the comeback kid to go from where he was 2 years ago to today. And the question is, what were the factors that caused Kamala Harris and Biden to lose? And I would argue there were a bunch of them. What do you think? What do you think were the elections issues that caused Trump to win? Immigration, absolutely. Immigration was a huge issue. I mean, the out-of-control border. What else? Inflation. And the third one was, men playing women's sports. Those were the 3 big issues that really drove Americans crazy. And this just shows you what happened with inflation. This was amazing how much prices went up under Biden. 35% for food, gasoline went up 30%. And by the way, the official number for inflation over the 4-year period Biden was in office was 21%. How many of you think that the real number was higher than that? Raise your hand. I know my wife used to, I'd come home, she'd go, you always say that inflation is 20%. You're coming with me to the grocery store. You're coming with me. I mean, things that you had to buy were more expensive than even 20%. And so you can see there was a big, big difference there. And that was the one thing Americans hate is higher prices. They hate it. And every time we've had higher prices, incumbents lose. Jerry Ford lost because he had inflation. Jimmy Carter lost because he had inflation. And Joe Biden lost because of inflation, too. This is an interesting one. I like to look at inflation. When you have an overall inflation rate, you're looking at all the industries. That's a conglomeration of every industry. But guess what? Some industries have more inflation than others, right? And so if you look at this, I don't know how well you can read this because it's in small letters, but the red lines are the ones that have really exploded in cost over the last 25 years, and the blue ones where we've had modest or declining. And if your computers, cell phone costs, even things like clothing, cars, they haven't really actually risen very much in price over the last 25 years. So there's been almost no inflation or disinflation in those industries. Look, ladies and gentlemen, at the industries where costs are out of control. What are you seeing? Education and healthcare. Education and healthcare are the 2 industries we've had massive inflation. Now, I will give an autographed copy of my latest book to whoever can tell me what is similar about education and healthcare. What's that? Government. Yeah, these are the industries that are run by government. When I ask my liberal friends, I say, the book. I'm not leaving this place till I sign the book. But my point is that, it's really interesting when I ask some of my liberal friends, and I do have liberal friends, and I say, why is it that we so subsidize, healthcare and education? Because, when you think about it, healthcare and education are probably 2 of our most important industries, wouldn't you say? Healthcare, or, how long we can live and how well we educate our kids. And I asked my liberal friends that, and they say, I said, why do we subsidize them? They said, to make them affordable. They're doing a great job of it, wouldn't you say? So maybe we shouldn't be spending. By the way, I know that a lot of you probably don't have kids in college, but some of you may have grandkids. How many of you have grandkids in college? A lot of you do. Anybody have kids in college? Maybe I have one left in college. The single greatest financial ripoff in America is how much colleges and universities are charging our families. It is outrageous. It is. How many of you agree with me on that? It's completely outrageous how much they're spending. And we need to do something about that. Okay. Moving on. Why did we have the inflation? Here's a good economic lesson. Where did it come from? Well, maybe it's because we spent $4 trillion we didn't have. This isn't complicated stuff. And by the way, Trump takes some blame here too. Trump spent a lot of money during COVID as well. We spent, the first big one was under Trump, and then all of these spending programs. And so basically, we spent $4 trillion. Now, where did that money come from? We printed it. We just printed it. We took out the printing presses and we printed $4 trillion, and almost like, taking them, putting them in a helicopter and dumping them out of the window. Now, this is such an obvious economic point. It's an inviolable law of economics. It comes from my good friend Milton Friedman. Inflation let me put it differently. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, right? And so if you dump $4 trillion in the economy without increasing the number of goods, prices have to go up. It's as obvious as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. So this was a big problem, and we need to do something about the overspending problem. Now, people always ask me, I know many of you in the Q&A are going to ask me about the national debt, so let me just make one point about it, and we can talk about it more in depth. That red line you're seeing is, how many of you in this room would say you're very worried about the national debt? Raise your hand. How many of you say you're somewhat? How many of you say you're not worried about it at all? Okay, a couple of you. So I would say I'm somewhat. I'm in the somewhat category. Now, here's the thing. That red line is the scary picture that you see all the time on the headlines of the New York Times, and all the news shows show you our debt going up and up and up and up from 100% to 150 to 200% of GDP. That would be a catastrophe. That would be our debt burden would be so big, we'd just be paying taxes to pay the interest on the debt. So I think we all would agree we can't live with that. But I've shown this to Donald Trump. I've shown it to all the Republican leaders of the Congress and some of the Democrats who will listen to me. And this is important. The most important thing about the debt numbers, just with any projection, is what kind of estimates you're making, what kind of projections you're making about what's going to happen in the future. The CBO is saying we're going to grow at 1.7%. Now, 1.7% is hell no. We're America. We're not going to grow 1.7%. We have to grow much faster than that. We have to grow at least 3%. Our historical average growth rate for the United States over the last 100 years is 3.2%. So we can grow at 3%. Now look what happens if we grow at 3%. Look at that blue line. Look what happens. We bend the curve down and the debt burden goes down, not up. By the way, if we get 3.5% growth, look at this. We start paying off the national debt. So my point is, and this is what I tell all the politicians, whatever you do, make sure whatever changes you're making are going to make the economy grow faster, not slower. Faster, not slower. So that's why people say, oh, let's just tax the rich. Do you think the economy's grow faster or slower if we do that? It's going to grow slower because you're going to have rich people doing less and moving other places, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the key to this. How do we get faster growth? Now, I wanted to show you this chart because when I put that book together with my friend Art Laffer, called The Trump Economic Miracle. Remember I mentioned that I got together 2 years ago with Trump out in Bedminster, and I came with this, all these charts, because again, he loves looking at charts, and I showed about 15 charts, but this is the one he really honed in on. That red bar is how much illegal immigration went up, under Trump's presidency, and then you can see the massive increase in illegal immigration when 6 to 8 to 10 million illegals came in under Biden. By the way, how many of you think they let them in intentionally? I don't know, but I don't understand why because it's been only 6 months and we've gotten 92% reduction. It wasn't that hard. So I don't think they tried to stop the illegal flow. But regardless of what their motivation was, this was a giant increase. And this is one of the reasons people were very, very upset about it. And by the way, I'm very pro-immigration. I think immigrants are great for our country. I think we need more immigrants, but they have to come in the right way, right? They have to come in legally, not illegally. Anyway. So I showed this chart to Trump, and out of the 20 charts I showed him, this is the one. He loved this chart. And he goes, I remember, he went to show the whole economics and political theory. Look at this chart, da, 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 da. Does anybody know the significance of this chart? So the significance of this chart, I heard a couple people shout it out, was that a year later, he was in Pennsylvania, and he was giving a speech, and he put, not exactly this chart, but essentially this chart up, and he turned to the thing, and the bullet went whizzing by him. Ladies and gentlemen, I saved Donald Trump's life. Okay. Tax cut was a big deal. This was something we had to do. We got it done by July 4th, which was a miracle. It's a good tax bill. We lowered the top tax rate. We increased the standard deduction. By the way, today only 9% of Americans have to itemize their deductions. So it was a vast simplification of our tax system. You just check the box. It made it much simpler to do taxes. We gave small businesses a 25% reduction in taxes. Small businesses, of course, are the backbone of our economy. We got rid of effectively the alternative minimum tax. For those of you who are seniors in this room and getting up there like I am, I just turned 65. You start thinking about the death tax. We reduced the amount of people who have to pay the death tax by double. I personally think the death tax is the most immoral tax we've ever had. I mean, you spend your whole life paying your income taxes, your payroll taxes, your sales taxes, your property taxes, your this tax, that tax, and then they tax you when you die. I think it's outrageous. But anyway, we provided a lot of relief on that. That's a huge thing, and it's one of the reasons I'm bullish, because now we have certainty about what's going to happen with our tax code. Now, this is the chart I showed Trump at that first meeting that he belongs in the Smithsonian Institute, because that black dotted line there, you're looking there at the top, that was the U.S. tax on our corporations over the last 30 years or so. And then the blue pillars are what all these other countries were charging. You can see what was going on is all the other countries were lowering their taxes, lowering more and more and more and more and more and more on their businesses, and we stayed up here. And I showed Trump this, and I said, look, they have a tax that's half of what our tax is. And I remember Trump said, well, he looked at it and said, it's like we're putting a tariff on our own goods and services. And I said, Mr. President, that's a good way to put this. And anyway, immediately, when he saw this, he said, we got to cut the corporate rate, and we did that, and now we're down to the average. And that, taxes matter. People and businesses will move to where taxes are. By the way, does anybody know what country in the world has the lowest business tax rate? What'd you say? Ireland. Very good. Ireland has the lowest tax rate in the world, and so guess what? You have a lot of American corporations which are domiciled in Ireland because they could pay less taxes. And by the way, as another follow-up question on this, does anybody know why Ireland is always a great place to invest in? Because the capital is always Dublin. Oh, no, that's terrible. Sorry about that. Okay. When you lower tax rates, you get more revenues. This is called the Laffer curve, right? And you can see when look what happened under Reagan. We cut the rates, the revenues went way up. Even under Trump, here's the Trump tax cut. We lowered the rates. Look, I mean, people keep saying the richest 1% aren't paying their fair share of taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, today in America, the richest 1% pay a higher share of the income tax than ever before in American history. Ever before. So where's this big tax cut for the rich? I don't see it. They're paying more, not less. I feel that I mentioned this before. These endowments, these are the university endowments of the 25 largest universities in America, and they now have about $800 billion to $1 trillion in endowments. $800 billion to $1 trillion. This is money that has never been taxed. Never. It's a vast storehouse of wealth, and I have a problem with this. I think we should tax these endowments. I think we should do it to lower our debt because they're not. Harvard has so much money, by the way, that Harvard could charge free tuition to every student that goes to Harvard from now until forever, and they still wouldn't run out of money. And yet they have not. Have any of these schools reduced their tuitions? Have any of them? I haven't seen it. So we ought to do that. And I'm anti-tax, but this is something that ought to be taxed. Regulations are a big deal, and they went way up. I think we can save $1 trillion a year on regulations. But I want to get to this next one. This is really important. We have this new study we've just done, looking at where people are moving to and where they're from. And this is the biggest story in America today. The migration patterns of America, which states are up and which states are down, is transforming America day by day, week by week, month by month, in a profound way. Probably this has been the biggest migration shift in the history of the country. And so what you can see here is these massive amounts of, first of all, look at the winning states. These are the states that have, how many of you have a place in Florida? Raise your hand. How many of you are Florida resident? A lot of you are. Well, you're smart. What's the income tax in Florida? 0. Texas. Any Texans in this? Anybody? A few Texans. What's the income tax rate in Texas? 0. You look at these other states, by the way, the sixth biggest one is Tennessee. Anybody know what the income tax rate in Tennessee is? 0. Boy, I wonder if there's something going on here where people are moving to low tax states. So Florida is just blowing away. By the way, Florida has imported $200 billion a year in additional income from the rest of the country. So it's that giant sucking sound is people leaving mostly blue states for the red states. For the first time, by the way, in American history, this had never happened before. For the first 249 years of our country, the dominant region of our country was the Northeast. It was New York, it was Philadelphia, it was Baltimore, it was Boston, it was that financial and industrial corridor that ruled the world. Today, for the first time in history, the dominant region in the United States is not the Northeast, it's the Southeast. And it's because what's happening in Florida and Texas, North Carolina, all these states are growing like weeds. Now, look at the states that are losing population. And I know most of you we're sitting here in New York, but you could understand why, other than this time of year, people might not want to live in New York. I mean, the weather's not great and so on. I'm from Illinois. I hate to see what's happened there. New Jersey, Massachusetts, those states are being led because and incidentally, the two states with the highest tax rate are California and New York. Gee, they're leaving. Who would ever thunk it? Now, here's the thing. When I ask people about this, they would say, the reason people are moving to the Southeast is because of the weather. And by the way, it's true. I mean, the weather is very nice in the Southeast, especially now we have air conditioning. People can live in the Southeast all year long, et cetera. And so there is some truth to that. The Southeast has better weather than the Northeast has. But California, how do you ruin California? I mean, it has the most beautiful mountains, beautiful beaches, beautiful weather, beautiful women. I mean, what's not to like about California? It's a slice of heaven. For the first time in American history, 2 million people every 5 years are leaving California. That is an astounding thing.
Terrible politics.
What's that?
Terrible politics.
Terrible policy. Yeah, they have the highest taxes, highest regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what's really changing America. You can see here the red state, the ones in red are the ones that are losing population, the ones in blue are gaining. So my advice is, by the way, this is kind of a fun one too. We do an economic rating of which are the best states in the country and which are the worst in terms of economic policy. Sorry, New York ranks 50. But Utah has the best economic environment in the country in terms of taxes, regulations, et cetera, right to work laws. And it's so interesting because we've done this for 14 years, this survey, and every year Utah has come out number one, and then Idaho is always up there too. Something about the Mormons, they just know how to do it, but that's kind of an incredible one. Okay, let me switch directions a little bit and talk about energy policy, because this is a big one. And we're going to make massive changes in our energy policy in this country. First of all, there is a mythology going on that there is a green energy transition going on in America. It is not happening. It is not happening. It is a lie that we're de-emphasizing fossil fuels. When Biden came into office, we got 83% of our energy from fossil fuels. Right? 83% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. Today, 82%. 82% of our energy comes from good old oil, gas, and coal. Those are just facts. Now that includes transportation fuels, providing electric power for our factories, for our homes, for the internet, all of that stuff. 82% of it comes from fossil fuels. And by the way, there is probably no country in the world that is more endowed with fossil fuels than the US of A. New York is making a huge, huge mistake in not allowing fracking in the state. You know what they're doing in Pennsylvania, right on the border down here? They're going down and then they're using horizontal drilling. They're going under New York and they're taking out all your oil and gas. I mean, you're not saving anybody's life by doing this. So we are a fossil fuel dependent country. Nuclear has some. Wind and solar are pretty irrelevant. I'm not saying we shouldn't use wind and solar. And when it's appropriate, if you live in Arizona, Phoenix, you probably should use solar power because you get a lot of sun power. If you live in, the plains of Texas, wind power make a difference too. But these are niche forms of energy. And one of the most sinister movements in America, how many of you have heard of something called net zero? Raise your hand if you. Net zero is a very, very dangerous idea. In other words, if you were Dr. Evil and you wanted to destroy the United States, net zero would be a great way to do it. If you destroy a country's energy supply, you destroy the country's economic engine. And so we cannot do that, and it's not going to happen. By the way, this is so amazing. Look at U.S. energy production over the last 15 years. That is the most amazing story. If I had been in this hall 20 years ago and told you that the United States is going to go on the biggest boom in oil production in history, you would have laughed me out of this room. You would have said that is absolutely, geologically impossible. But it happened. Now, for another signed autographed copy of my book, how many of you can tell me what caused that? Yes? Cracking. Oh, cracking. This is a new technology that allowed us access to massive amounts of energy. We cracked the code. This is human ingenuity. We find that it's not like all of a sudden that oil just showed up. It had been there for hundreds of thousands of years. It's just we finally figured out how to, crack through that rock formation, get it out. It's been an amazing thing. And it's fracking and the horizontal drilling that changed the whole world. And this has been an amazing thing. Now, some of you may be concerned about, how many of you are concerned, no, seriously, I want you to answer. How many would you say are seriously concerned about climate change? Raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you would say you're somewhat concerned about it? How many, not much? Okay, maybe a third. I'm not a climatologist. I'm not here to tell you it's a great crime. I don't know. But I will tell you this. What the United States does with our energy has zero impact, zero, on what will happen to the climate of the country if CO2 emissions are causing and there's there's a debate about how much CO2 is. There is no question the planet is warming. It is warmed by about 1.5 degrees over the last century, and that's a fairly significant amount. There's a lot of questions about why that's happening, but I'm here to tell you, even if the United States cut our carbon emissions to zero, it would have almost no impact because of China. China's emissions are through the roof. So every time, these are coal plants, every time we shut down a coal plant in the United States, and we're doing that, look at, China builds 10 of them. Is there anybody in this room who actually thinks that President Xi cares about climate change? I mean, seriously. I mean, the only person in the country who thinks that is Joe Biden. So they're building coal plants and we're shutting ours down. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, a few more points, and then I'm going to throw this open. Here's that debt picture. This is why we need to be worried. And one of the things that I like about this chart is it shows, this is the historical chart going all the way back to the founding of our nation 250 years ago. And you can see, starting at the very left end of that picture, we fought the Revolutionary War, so we borrowed to fund, our independence. And so the debt went up. And then look what happened over the next 20, 25 years. We very conscientiously paid down that debt when the war was over. And then you can see we had the Civil War to end slavery. And after this, so a massive amount of debt. And then what happened after the Civil War, the debt went down. You can see that there. And then World War I, a lot of debt, we paid it down. World War II, look what happened to the debt after World War II. Went down, 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 down. And even after the pandemic, the debt went down a little bit. But this is the first time in American history we are borrowing massive amounts of money and there's no crisis. In other words, why? Why are we borrowing $2 trillion a year? It doesn't make any sense. So this is what scares me, because in good times you're supposed to start paying down your debt, and we're not doing that. And then we need to change that, and we need to grow the economy and put a lid on government spending. So I'll show you one or two more quick points that I feel very strongly about. This is median income in the United States. And there's nothing that makes me angrier as a, red, white, and you cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. So I hate it when people say that the United States is a systemically racist country. I reject that totally. Now, do we have racism in our past? Of course. Do we have sins in our past? Of course we do. Slavery, segregation, Jim Crow laws, horrible incidents in America. But I would make the case to you that the United States is the only, maybe in all of history, the only successful multicultural society. And we are. There is no country that is able to assimilate people from different cultures and countries and skin colors than the United States does. It's just a fact. We are a melting pot, and I think we're all proud of that. And so I like to show this chart to say, when my liberal friends, it's only white Americans. White Americans are the ones whites benefit and everybody else is left behind. Oh, really? Okay, well, let's look. This is from the most recent census data. This is the best data we have on median income in the United States. Can you see that? Can you see the countries that are at the top of that? Oh, let's see, Taiwanese Americans, Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans. Wait a minute. These are Asians. Wait a minute, they have brown skin. How can we be a systemically racist country if people with brown skins have higher incomes than whites do? We're systemically racist. Even, by the way, Hispanic Americans have seen gigantic increases in their... Now, Hispanics are still behind, but the Hispanic success story, economic success story in America is a fantastic thing. They're rising the economic ladder. The tragedy has actually been black Americans. They are not making the progress that we would like to see. And there may be a lot of reasons for that, and some of that is racism, but it's not only racism. There are a lot of factors, and to just blame everything on racism is wrong. I know again, let me just make one last fun one, and then let's discuss this. So what's going on with voting in America? And I think this is a really interesting one. So if you look at this chart, this shows what happened with voting back in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan won his 2 landslide elections. And so you can see what you're looking at here is on the far left side, those are the poorest districts in America, and those are the poorest districts in America, and on this side, these are the richest districts. Okay, you follow me? And so it goes from poorest to richest, and then the blue line is the share of the vote that was won by the Democrats. And so what this is showing you is basically the poorer the district back in the 1980s, the more likely that district was to vote Democrat, and the richer the district, those are the red bars, the richer they were more likely to vote for Ronald Reagan. That was the case in 1980. That is not the case today. And this is one of the most interesting political developments of our lifetimes. So this is what's happened in the last 2 elections. So you can see that, again, the blue pillars are the share of the Democratic vote, and the red pillars are the share of the Republican vote. Now look at that. First of all, it's for the Democrats, it's a U shape. The Democrats won hugely in the poorest districts, which probably is not a surprise. Look at this. These are the 20 richest districts in the country. They didn't go for Trump. They went for Biden. But the reason Trump won this election was not because of rich people. Trump won the middle class, working class districts. Look at it, you can see that. So you've got it, if you're a Democrat, I know there are a lot of Democrats in this room, you better do something about connecting with middle class voters, because the Democrats have forgotten how to do that. Look, I remain really optimistic about the U.S. economy. I think things were looking really good. I know you have questions about trade and other things, but I just want to thank you again for your kind attention, and happy to take whatever questions.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you a question? What is your feelings about gerrymandering?
Okay.
You have to stay behind
The question
that.
was about gerrymandering. I hate gerrymandering. I hate it. I think it's outrageous. In the year 2025, we still have politicians drawing the lines. It's outrageous. The solution to this is so obvious and simple. Take politicians out of the process entirely. How many are with it? Take the politicians out of it, right? I mean, come on. We can do this with random number generators. A computer can do it in 2 minutes. There's no political bias. You put as many people as closely, next to each other as possible, and then there's no gerrymandering. Because when you have gerrymandering, instead of the voters choosing the politicians, you now have a situation where the politicians are choosing the voters. And I hate that. So how many are with me on this? Get rid of gerrymandering. All right. I don't want Republicans or Democrats.
Please. I'll hold you talk.
Given the current price earnings ratio, what's your current investment recommendation?
As you said last night, next question. Right.
If you take investment advice from me, you're going straight to the poorhouse. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I've only made one really good investment in my life, and that was probably my wife. But my second best investment, which actually was the investment she made, 7 years ago, we bought NVIDIA, and it's gone up 20-fold. So we made a great, great event. But look, you know, this is an amazing statistic, and I don't know if this can keep going, but God bless the United States of America. We have completely dominated the internet age. The United States is so technologically and technically superior to the rest of the world. It's awesome. And by the way, this is Silicon Valley, it's Boston, it's what's going on in Austin. We have incredible thinkers. A lot of them are immigrants, talents. You know, half of the Fortune 500 companies were founded either by an immigrant or the son or daughter of an immigrant. So we need immigrants in this country. And so we have now a situation with the Magnificent Seven. It's NVIDIA, it's Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and Meta. Those 7 companies have more net worth than every single company in Europe combined. Think about that. Every other country. And so if these trends continue, those 7 will have more value than all of the countries in the world. So we have to keep investing in our technology companies. We need to be dominant in AI, robotics. This is one of my pet peeves. We have to stay number one. And by the way, the reason we were number one in the internet and we blew away the rest of the world is for once, the one of the few times the politicians made a great decision. And this was Bill Clinton, a Democrat, who did this. In 1996, we made a decision. We were going to make the internet subsidy-free, tax-free, and lawsuit-free. And it was like the Wild West, and we sprouted incredible companies. We need to do that with AI and robotics, and I think we will.
Hi, I have 2 questions. They're quick. The first one is where can we get a copy of all these charts?
It costs $1,000. Can you?
Yes, I have it. Yeah, I
They're
have it.
very convincing, and I'd like to have a copy.
I have it.
So I want to make sure we put out how many of you get our hotline in the morning? I know a few of you do. If you don't get it, just go to unleashprosperity.com. Just unleashprosperity.com, and you can just push the button that says hotline and say you want the email, and you can get it for free. So it's a great source for good information. Thanks. But Connie, we'll make sure we get those charts for you. Thank you.
So the next thing is kind of a comment, but the big discussion is about tariffs.
Yes.
And I think the Republicans have a messaging problem. I'm wondering why we keep talking or let the other side talk about tariffs when all Trump is negotiating for is parity.
Yes.
So when you talk to a libertarian or somebody who's for free trade, and then they say they're against tariffs, he's not trying to institute tariffs. He's trying to get parity.
So Connie, you're making a great point. I could not have said it better than Connie did. You're right. Look, and I'm not a tariff guy. I mean, look, tariffs are taxes. I don't like taxes, and I'm a free trade guy. Trade is the very essence of economics. So if we have tariffs, I want them to be low. I am opposed to the steel tariffs. I think they're a really bad idea. We're actually losing more manufacturing jobs as a result of steel tariffs. You know, the estimates are we saved about 10,000 steel jobs with the tariffs, but have lost about 100,000 other manufacturing jobs. I can't tell you how many times I'm talking to medium-sized manufacturing owners who say, we've had to lay off people, we can't get the parts in we need. So tariffs do have negative effects. But Connie is right. Trump is using this as leverage to force other countries to do things that they should have been done. You're right, Connie, it has not been a level playing field. And I always say this, if you want to understand Donald Trump, if you want to understand him, you have to read the book. What book am I talking about? How many of you read that book? Not half of you. It's what every MBA student and every university should be reading that book. There are so many incredible insights about how you negotiate. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, he is a master negotiator. And what comes blaring through after you read that book is one word: leverage. Leverage. If you have leverage over the person you're negotiating with, you're going to probably win that negotiation. If that person has leverage over you, you're probably going to lose. And what Trump realized is that we're the alpha male. Every country in the world has to trade with the United States. Now, we benefit from trading with other companies, but they have to trade with us. China's economy would go into a Great Depression if they could not trade stuff with us. Trump is basically threatening them with 50% tariffs, with the Europeans with 50% tariffs. And you know what? They said, oh, well, they're going to negotiate. They negotiated. And you know what? As a result of that, they're basically saying they're going to lower their tariffs on our agricultural products, our manufacturing products, their discrimination against our tech products. I'm all for that. And I think at the end of the day, Trump's, quote, trade wars are going to end with trade deals that give America a leg up. So again, I'm a free trade guy, but this may lead to freer and fairer trade.
In spite of your phenomenal statistics, when you are called a fascist, how do you respond? And number two, with the pharmaceuticals having such a concentration in China, does that concern you?
Yes.
And what should we as a country do about that?
So look, I don't think Trump is a fascist. I don't agree with everything he does. I do worry sometimes about some of these deals that he's cutting where he's saying, oh, these countries, Apple has to give a certain amount of money to the government and so on. Look, all I want is a fair playing field. Most of you are in this room because you believe in free market economics. A good tax system is very simple. A low rate and a broad base. Everybody, in this room pays the same rate, but nobody's exempt from it. And I don't like this idea of cutting a deal for this company or that deal. It was Apple, Tim Cook, about 2 months ago, went into the White House, struck a deal with Trump, and he walks out, and the next day the stock goes up by $500 billion. I don't like that kind of insider trading stuff. So I want to see policies that benefit everybody, not just our big businesses. And look, our small businesses and medium-sized businesses are critical to our country. So, but I don't believe he's a fascist. I believe he's doing securing the border. They say he's a fascist because he's come on. I mean, 90% of Americans are in favor of securing our border, right? I'm pro-immigration. Let's get the border secure. And by the way, Tom Homan, who's the border czar, he's a good friend of mine. He's done an amazing job. He reduced illegal crossings by 94% in 90 days. That's pretty phenomenal, wouldn't you say? And now, and by the way, he's done it. He has done it in a way that's been very humanitarian. I'm not in favor of raiding factories. I'm not in favor of raiding, farms and And what I favor is, I like this idea of, I wonder what you think. I call it pay to stay. So if you're an illegal immigrant, you're in this country, and let's say you've been here for 5 years, and you have no criminal record, you've got a job, you've been paying your taxes, you pay a fine, and you get to stay here, but you don't get a path to citizenship. How many of you would favor something like that? We'll see. But I don't think he's a fascist because of the fact that he's deporting people. What Tom Homan has done really effectively is a worst first strategy. We're getting rid of criminals, we're getting rid of drug runners, we're getting potential terrorists, we're getting rid of sexual predators. Those people we're chasing out of this country, and I'm very pleased to say that's been a success.
Hi, sir. I have two quick questions for you. One was in 2012, you helped with the campaign of Herbert Kane, I believe.
Yes, I love
and,
999.
Yes, the 99 tax. I'm curious to hear a little bit about that and how maybe you use that to inform President Trump. My second question is, what advice would you give young Americans to make sure that the U.S. economy stays, you said 20 years, for 50 or 100, hundreds of years, that we stay on top of the world compared to China? And
So it's a great question. So I'm gonna put you all to work. So there's three alternatives for tax reform. Okay, one is how many of you have heard of something called the flat tax? This is the flat rate tax. Everybody pays 19%. There's no deductions except for yourself and your kids. But none of this other. You don't get tax deductions for gold sperm and windmills and all this stuff. Everybody pays the same amount, you get just everybody pays that low tax rate. That's one proposal, and that's Dick Armey and Steve Forbes have been promoting that. And then the second, how many of you have heard of something called the fair tax? Raise your
Yes.
hand. If you haven't heard of that,
HR 25.
What's that?
HR 25, 2005.
there you go. So we could, I don't remember the rate, I think it's like 22, 23%.
Yeah, 23.
You have a national sales tax, all income taxes are gone, the income tax, personal income tax is gone, the corporate income tax is gone, the capital gains tax is gone. You just pay your taxes at the cash register when you buy things. No income tax. It's no longer the government's money, how much business, how much money you make. There's no IRS harassing you, And you're just basically taxing people on what they take out of the economy is what they consume, not what they produce. And so that's the second idea. And by the way, no IRS, blah, 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 no tax forms. And the third idea is to keep the tax system pretty much the way it is. All right, so let's have a vote. You're my focus group today. How many of you would choose the flat tax? Maybe about a quarter. How many of you like the fair tax? How many of you like it just the way it is? All right, maybe 30. Some of you never voted. Some of you never raised your hand. But anyway, those are the options. And 999 is just a variation of the flat tax. Now, I want to say something about young people. This is really important. One of the most important statistic, if you've got grandkids or kids that are still of a young age, every study shows this. The younger you start working, the more successful you are. The younger you start working. We have this idiot idea today that, 15 and 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds, they shouldn't be working. It's ridiculous. I mean, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, one of the cool things about being at the Journal was you meet incredibly successful people in every walk of life, in sports, in academia, in science, in business, in finance, et cetera, entertainment, whatever it is. The people at the pinnacle of their profession and who've gotten very rich. And every time we'd meet with these people, almost every time, I would ask them, hey, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? And it's amazing to me, now this was 20 years ago, so times have changed a little bit, how many of these very, very, very successful people said they grew up on a farm. They grew up on a farm. Now, what's interesting about that? I know this because my wife grew up on a farm. When you grow up on a farm, you start working when you're about 8 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And instilling that work ethic in young people is absolutely critical to their success. It really is. And so, if you can get people working at a young age, it has dramatic positive impacts over their whole life.
Okay. We are pushing up against 4 o'clock, okay? So
maybe we can have each one of these three.
Yeah, okay. I grew up working on a farm. I would have one question for the audience. How many of you raise your hands understand that fascism is a direct derivative of socialism going back to Karl Marx? Okay? Fascism is not hating an individual person. Fascism is saying we are going to control your economy. Okay, my question is, go back to when Trump 47 took office, the global tariff structure. Do you believe, as many economists do, that was a Pareto optimal for the global economy? Or was it that the tax structures in place when Trump took office, 47, was a Pareto optimal? His second term, 47. Was that a Pareto optimal for the global? And was it even close to being a local optimal for Main Street?
Okay, you can use that.
Yeah.
Use that.
You got it right, exactly, true.
Okay.
That wasn't anything. My book.
Assuming the Fed will come to its senses and rates will drop, and inflation Fed will come to its senses and rates will drop, and interest rates for an extended period of time will stay low. GDP grows at 3%. We all agree that any good corporation manages leverage in their balance sheet appropriately. You talked about leveraging a deal, same thing in maximizing returns.
Yes.
At what percent of GDP? What's the sweet spot
For what?
for debt?
Debt.
For debt.
Federal debt?
Federal debt.
Who's that?
That's a great question. What's the optimal number? It's certainly not zero. Certainly not zero. I do think our debt is way, how many of you think our debt is way too high? I mean, 37 trillion is way too high. I want it stabilized. I want to see it stable, at maybe, right now we're at, we're at 120% or something like that. We need to bring that down to about 50%. It's way, way too high. But if you get growth, I mean, it was Albert Einstein who once said that the most powerful force in the universe is the compound interest. So you compound a higher growth rate, and over time that brings the debt down. But my God, I mean, we have $560 billion a year of erroneous payments in Washington. And that's not Doge. That's not Elon Musk. That's the government's own auditors saying $560 billion is stolen out of it from people who are not eligible. Many of them don't even live in the United States. They're getting Social Security checks in these other countries. They're ripping us off. We have got to, just cutting that in half would have a huge, huge impact on reducing our debt and deficit. So there's so many things that we could do to bring down the spending. We should do a 10% across the board cut in spending right now. Just, you know, that would save $500 billion. Last one.
I am not an economist, I'm a physician.
So you understand how the world works, and I don't.
I
No,
understand part of it, I understand part of it.
Yes.
So you mentioned that Biden spent $4 trillion and Trump's bill puts another $4 trillion into the debt side.
wait, what does that mean?
So,
Wait, hold
what
on.
the bill that you just passed.
No.
Well, before.
No, because this is important. This is a lie, that this bill that we passed
Okay.
will not increase the deficit.
Okay, that's not my
It will
question,
not.
though.
But
Okay.
but people keep saying that, I want to make
Okay.
sure people understand.
Okay.
When we did the first bill, basically what this bill does is extend the tax cuts we already put in place. Every single year we put in place that tax cut, what happened to tax revenues? Did they go up or down? They went up. There was no reduction in revenues.
Okay.
It's all overspent.
Okay, that's not my question.
Okay, but I wanted to get that off my
Okay,
chest.
so my question is that the bill that just passed will lead to a reduction in support for the Affordable Care Act, where 40% of people will not be able to afford insurance, and also a reduction in Medicaid, which will cause many, many hospitals to close.
Yeah.
And hospitals represent 15% of our employment right now,
Yeah.
and in Atlanta, Emory's the #1 employer in Atlanta.
Yes.
Do you feel that this trade-off we're making in order to continue tax savings is enough to warrant the closure of hospitals, not just in rural areas, but in cities as well?
Okay, so, sir, stay here, because I'm going to admit to, you're in the healthcare profession?
Yeah.
So I will admit to you, you probably know a lot more about healthcare than I. Okay, I mean, because I'm not in the profession, you understand. The economics of healthcare is so frickin' confusing. I don't know a lot about it. I will say this, though. What we did in that bill was we basically said, we did two things. And no, seriously, tell me if you agree or disagree with these policies. We said, if you're not eligible for the program, you don't get the benefit. Congress sets the eligibility standards. If you're an illegal immigrant in this country, you don't get the benefits. Now, do you have a problem with that?
That's not my problem.
Okay. Okay, so let me just a second. Hold on. I'll give you a chance to respond. Let me say the second thing. So the second thing we did, which is maybe a little bit more controversial, we said, if you are of workable age and you don't have a disability and you should be and could be working, you're only going to get Medicaid if you're in the labor force looking for a job or a training program. We're not going to pay you Medicaid for sitting on the couch and watching TV. Now, the other part, so how are we cutting, I don't understand how we're cutting the
My
hospital.
concern is that in Georgia, when we tried
Yes.
to do that,
Yep.
we had a very, very unsuccessful effort in getting people to fill out the paperwork to show that they're either working or looking for a job, which is very difficult for them.
Yes.
So instead of having 500,000, we had 5,000
Wow.
that were able to get insurance. And the hospitals right now are barely able to make it to they take $1 trillion out of Medicaid and 40% out of the insurable people on the Affordable Care Act. We will have hospitals closed. We've seen one hospital close in Atlanta the last 4 years. It almost decimated the hospital.
Okay, got it.
The
All right.
administration
First
is
of all-
paid too much.
Let me just
The
say,
administration is paid too much, not the caregiver. It's the head of the hospital who doesn't deliver.
Yes, I know.
I
Yeah.
just want to tell you one thing on the way out. First of all, that's really, that's no big issue. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Republicans, you know, they're the greatest.
It's 5 after 4.
Okay, but last thing I'll say about it. So you know, this is what I think about the two children. This is a story about these two kids who are, well, 7 and 8 years old, and they're going to go down to breakfast one morning. And the 7-year-old says to the 7-year-old, when we go down to breakfast this morning, let's each say a curse word, come on. And somebody gave away, and they said, that's really funny, let's do it. So the one said, you know, I'll say hell to mom, and you say the word ass to mom. He said, that's just funny. So he go downstairs, and the mother's, you know, they said, what would you like for breakfast? He asked the older son. And he says, well, what the hell, Mom? I think I'll have Cocoa Krispies. Well, the mother is aghast at this kind of language. She's furious. She fumes. She's so angry. She's
grabs that boy by the shoulder, shakes him, and says, "You never use that kind of language in this house again. You understand me? Now, as a punishment, no breakfast for you, you go upstairs." Well, the other little boy's just been shuddering, he's so afraid, about this Mount St. Helens eruption from his mother. And she points his bigger brain, "You, what do you want for breakfast?" And he shuddered, he could barely touch him. "Oh, Mom, I'm not really sure, but I need to get back to the sweet ass thing home for Christmas." That's the difference between the two political parties. One sues up and the other comes in and does the same thing. And so I don't remember that. Okay, thanks so much for having me. Give me a